So we thought that the controversy and argument around the tax reform bill was over after the politicians had an agreement on the sharing formula, but it seems it's far from over. Let's get the views of Mr. Bismarck Rewane, the Chief Executive Officer of Financial Derivatives Company, on this. Mr. Rewane, I know you've been following this story. The Senate are done with their public hearing. Now is the House of Representatives, and we hear, some arguments and non-agreement of some parts coming up. I do hope this will not, at the end of the day, whittle down the strength of this reform that we seem to have celebrated long before now.
Good morning. Thank you, Ian, for having me. The problem with taxes are that they say that two things are certain in life: death and taxes. But taxes are very, very important. But what makes it quite confusing is that Nigerians are probably the least tax compliant set of people in this region, because only less than 8 or 9% of the Nigerian people pay taxes in anything. Therefore, and that's income taxes. Therefore, the country is left with no choice but to use what we call the benefit approach to taxes, which are easy to collect and easy to administer. For people to come out and say, please do not introduce or do not increase value-added taxes, when you know that there are lots of exemptions from these taxes, makes it, it's quite confusing. So I think that we are just going through the process of negotiations. The unions are making their voices heard. Traditional rulers are saying some things here and others. So I think that quite confident that in the next few days, the tax reform will go through, subject to the amendments that are being discussed. And therefore, we move on and ensure that, one, the incidence of tax falls on those who can afford it, and two, that the amount of tax collected actually increases, thereby increasing our tax to GDP ratio to where it is. We are way below the average across the world. In fact, much lower than most of our African countries and peers. I think that's what is important. But having said that, I wanted to jump into this whole Dangote refinery reduction in price, which was quite fascinating to me, in the sense that this reduction is 7% now, but if you add the previous 60 naira to the 65 naira, we're talking about 125 naira down at a time when global oil prices have actually gone down by only 10%. We've seen about almost a 14% reduction in price. So what does it mean? It means that Dangote's efficiency is passing on the cost efficiency of its production to the market. It is also establishing its position as a price leader in an industry which is under where there are many players. So I think that's important. But between everybody here, we should know that the price of petrol and the price of diesel are major causative factors for inflation in Nigeria. To a large extent, almost 14 to 15% of the inflation causative factors come from the cost of logistics. And when you look at the difference between rural and urban inflation, you will find out clearly that the difference between urban and rural inflation is actually due to the cost of moving goods and moving services across regions. Therefore, it's a very, very significant development at this time by the Dangote refinery to bring down prices. And we are hoping that it is true that it will happen, that producers of goods and services will actually pass on part of this benefit to the public. Prices are normally sticky downwards. And you will see that we do not believe that initially, at least for the next 2 weeks or so, that transport fares will go down. But after a while, it has a what they call a push-on effect, a knock-on effect to bringing down price of transport fares, price of goods and services. And we've seen that in our survey of commodities as well. that we are.
Sorry, Mr. Rewane, just a minute before you head to, the domestic commodities and how this slash in the price is going to affect that. Let's just take a break. We'll be back to continue that. Welcome back to Watching Business Morning, and we've been discussing at the commodities space, of course, first of all, the slash in the price of petrol by Dangote refinery, and now we still have Mr. Rewane, Mr. Bismarck Rewane with us to tell us how we hope this will seep down to commodities at this time. Mr. Rewane.
Yeah, it's interesting that they say at times when good things don't happen, they happen in bulk or together. We've seen this drop in the price of petrol in all about 125 naira in the last 2 months, coming to almost 14-15% drop in the price of petrol. We've seen diesel actually also decline in the same proportion. We have seen the currency appreciate significantly, and we are seeing signs that inflation may begin to taper. But I don't want us to get ahead of us. But what we've seen, noticed in the last few days, well, the price of pepper has been up 100%, which is interesting. Tomatoes is also up 14%. We attribute most of this to the fasting that's going to start by Saturday. But we've seen some items fall quite sharply. We've seen rice down by 5% to 90,000 naira a bag. We've seen garri fallen by 2.86%, and wheat flour down by 10%. And more than anything else, we saw Irish potatoes down by 11%. But the goods that stayed flat, that there were no price changes, are beans, yam tuber, eggs, and also sweet potatoes and onions. So what are we seeing for beans? Beans remains at 100,000 naira. Pepper bag, I already said that was up to 120,000 naira. Tomatoes up by 33% to 40,000, and rice down by 5% to 95,000. Garri is at 33,000 naira a bag. So what we are looking out for is from Saturday, when the fasting starts, we begin to see that the price of tomatoes, the price of pepper, the price of all the perishables and things they use for fasting, either before fast or breaking fast, we'll see the price of. We also think that because people start going for the lesser Hajj, we might see a higher demand for foreign exchange, and we don't know how that will play out at this time. But generally speaking, one interesting development in the commodity space is cocoa. Cocoa has gone up again. It dropped to about 8,000. Now it's up to $9,219 a ton. Don't forget, 2 years ago it was about $2,000 a ton. So it's up by 400% to 500%. For Nigeria, it means that our export earnings from cocoa will be anything between 2.7 to almost $3 billion. That is quite huge, and that supports the reserves. It supports the export earnings, and also it supports taxes that the farmers will pay, and it also creates a boom environment in Osun State, Ekiti State, and Oyo State, for example, and Ondo State. So we see that happening. So generally speaking, also another important commodity news is that the price of LNG went up by about 4%, to about $4 per BTU. But Shell is saying that they are forecasting a 60% increase in demand for LNG by the year 2040. Nigeria is a major producer of LNG. We have Nigeria, Mozambique, and Angola to a large extent. And even now, we are going to see investments in LNG in certain parts of West Africa. So having said that, it looks like the long-term trajectory for commodities in Nigeria, export commodities are higher, and domestic commodities are beginning to see some slowdown in price rises because of, one, harvests, two, the lower logistics and petrol costs, and three, appreciation of the currency. That's the outlook for commodities, at least for the next 2 to 3 weeks.
All right, Mr. Rewane, but I don't know, to me, it's a bit sad that we have to be checking, when it's harvest season and planting season, then we can expect the prices to fluctuate following the seasons. It doesn't look like we're doing a whole lot about preservation and storage, processing, so that even off-season, we still have some of these, especially the perishables, at good prices.
Yes, you're right. But let's take it this way. One, there's a commodities exchange. So once people now know that they can buy into the futures market or even forward markets in commodities, then it becomes profitable to invest in storage and preservation. So let's take the whole value chain. One, production process is improved by fertilizers and seedlings. Two, the transportation of products from the producing area to consuming area is reduced because of two things. One, concession of the roads, and two, the lower petrol prices. Then within the production areas, you have the storage facilities. So all of these investments are taking place almost simultaneously. But you see that the level of price volatility has been pretty wide. They've been swinging in all directions because of harvest and seasonality. Now this is what brings up the opportunity to invest in storage and preservation. And I think that's the next stage, and you will begin to see that happen soon. But for now, it's not happening, and it's a very important observation by you to notice that. And most investors, if you and I can notice that, you can imagine that investors are also doing that. Don't forget that even in the smuggling process, goods are brought in from outside the country through the borders into this place and taken out. And people, they have very efficient ways of transporting these goods and storing them so that the spoilage level is reduced. It's the next big investment opportunity: storage, processing, and also packaging.
I wonder how you think attention can be accelerated in that part, because obviously the incentive is there. Food business is always good business at any point of the value chain. But how can we maybe make it more attractive for investment and investors?
Well, you make a point about this opportunity. One thing I must point out, and 2-3 days ago when we spoke, we noticed that there was a threat to go on strike by the Ipman and all that because of what they call the bridging and equalization of prices across the country. What I can now say is that the Dangote Group has, on their own, brought in trucks and have actually emphasized almost an equalization of the price across the country. If that is the case, and the farmers know that the price of petrol is the same almost everywhere, they take advantage of that equalization to produce and transport to the other markets, and then reduce the seasonality effect of prices. I think that is very key. But there's a time lag between when you notice an opportunity, when you invest in the opportunity, and when the impact is felt. So I think that's extremely important. But we have to be patient to allow, one, people to invest, two, for people to now begin to reap the benefits of that investment and invest in the second phase, what we call there's early stage investment, there's middle stage investment. So that entire scenario has to be built out. But it's important now that the markets and the consumers are now beginning to determine what you produce and determine the price at which you can sell, because there's a lot of consumer resistance we are seeing across, right? So even when costs were increasing, consumers were resisting this and compelling producers, one, to produce efficiently, and two, to absorb some of the increased costs by themselves rather than passing it on to the market.
All right, Mr. Rewane, thank you so much. We do hope that it will become more glaring, those opportunities, and investors will be attracted to it. Mr. Bismarck Rewane is the Chief Executive Officer of Financial Derivatives Company. Thank you so much for your time.
It's my pleasure.